Hello, hello, everybody. How are you doing?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Is everybody having a good day?
Yes.
Guys, we're so close. Super exciting. So I finally got around to logging e-exam scores. If you're missing anything or if the score looks off to you, let me know. So if you're missing something, go ahead and turn it in. Do me a favor when you do, and just shoot me an email saying, "Hey Mia, don't forget to look." And that's because I when I get the what's it called? When I get the grade reports via email, I may glance at them, but then I'm doing other things. I'm just not paying proper attention. And so just a reminder email will be helpful if you can. But if you don't, at the end of the day, I'll be cycling through again before our semester ends. Speaking of end of the semester, so we've got another week of practice and review and sort of drilling down into the material even still more. And then and my advice to you is this: if you haven't already started working on your last exam, go ahead and do that. If your schedule is really, really hectic, then feel free to put that off, because remember, we've got so I'm following what was the original calendar, or spring semester calendar, which has the end of exam week on Monday, June 8th. So you've got that whole week. But if you need a bit more time, we should have some wiggle room there too. But so my advice is, if you can, go ahead and get started on that stuff so that you can bring up questions, we can resolve them, and then you can complete your work. That said, if stuff is really hectic for you, if you've got a lot of pressure from other courses to get certain things in by very explicit and unyielding deadlines, then obviously take care of those and then come back and we'll chat. Okay. If you have questions, problems, confusions, let me know. Otherwise, and I'm just looking to see if, okay. Otherwise, I dropped the ball on Tuesday. I meant to pick up with some translation practice we were working on, and I totally forgot. And we started, working on proof practice with a focus on existential elim. If I, just so that I don't forget again, let's pick up that discussion of the translations. So before I forget, let's go back to that discussion. Then we'll pick up with practice. And I'm thinking today we can work on some universal intro practice. So the idea is, we were focusing again on Tuesday on with a focus on existential elim. And then today we can we can still work some of that, but the focus today can be on universal intro. So with that in mind, we were working on specifically the distinction between only and the only. And the question that was on the table when we were looking at the only example is what the order is, right? So just as a reminder, when we see the word only, we can think back to our discussion of only if from chapter 7, and the fact that that we interpret only if in terms of translation in the consequent position, right? It expresses a necessary condition, so it goes in the consequent position. And the notation is antecedent, arrow, and then the phrase that comes immediately after only if. Similarly, when we've got only, where we're talking about, instead of singular sentences, that is, sentences involving named entities. When we've got a quantified sentence, we're talking about groups of things, sets of things, only acts in the same way. So one thing that we didn't chat about, but that might be worth thinking about is this. We know that the claim here is both immoral and illegal acts are go in the consequent position. So we could think of, in terms of a quantified sentence, all violations of public trust are acts both immoral and illegal, right? Now, let's go down to the only. Let's use that same thinking here. Is it the case that when we look at the sentence, the only prosecutable acts are illegal ones, that we can rewrite the sentence as follows? All prosecutable acts are illegal ones. And we could think in terms of nesting circles, right? What we're saying is that the everything within the prosecutable acts class is tucked within the larger class, or is nested in the larger class of illegal things. So there wouldn't be any prosecutable acts outside of those things that are illegal, which then leaves us with this translation. Okay. So before moving on, oops, I'm dropping books all over the place. Before moving on, while I fix up my desk, think about this and let me know if you have questions. And I should also point out, if you, when you're working on translations, feel a bit like you are discombobulated, that it's easy to get confused about kind of where you are in the structure of the sentence, it's not abnormal at all, right? So when you're thinking about the phrase "the only," you're going to think about all, right? And then now let's move on to a couple of sets, quantified sets, right? So we have some, but not all. So we want to think about how we're going to translate this. Some we know means at least one, and I can't remember how I ordered the shortcut key, so I'm just going to copy paste. Some, and then we have not all. So we're going to say it's not the case that every. And then we proceed with our translation, right? So how do we want to work this? Since it's the case that our existential is out front, remember our standard translation is, for the existential, is the...
Will both of them be the same variable?
You can change up the variable. Sure, let's do universal Y. Thanks, Deb. Remember, technically, a variable is just a placeholder. The visual distinction between one variable and another is useful to us, right, to separate out the domains that we're talking about. But we could very well provide iterations of the same variable. In principle, we don't do that in practice. So our standard translation is the conjunction, and I'm just putting the conjunction in the middle of the parenthetical because I'm thinking about that standard translation. Remember also that, right now we've got the sentence in pre-next form, which is to say the start of the sentence. The quantifiers are out front as opposed to nested. And we talked a bit about, if we go back to chapter 11, section 3, we get the nested process of translating. And I think I told you that the way that my mind works is such that I'm just more comfortable with building the translation in the way that's presented in 11:3, chapter 11, section 3, but not everybody is. So think about what makes sense to you, and use that as your foundation, but try to get comfortable with both. Okay, so here's the relationship, right? Immoral acts and impeachable acts. And then let's go back up to what we have here. X is an impeachable act. MX, X is immoral. So we're not talking about negating really, Mia? Negating anything. So MX and IX for immoral and impeachable. But now we've got an issue, right? Which is that it's not the case that every thing, right, is, but some things are both immoral and impeachable, but not everything is. So we're missing some elements, right? So it seems to me, if I can just for the moment cut this animal out, right? There is something, that thing is an immoral act, but also impeachable, right? But then remember, we've got to deal with the but not all. Well, how about this? I was about to write an X again. And okay. And sorry about this. Let me see if I can remember how I did my existential. Nope. I did this to you guys before, didn't I? Well, hopefully you're okay with that formatting. For the life of me, I can't remember. Hold on. That wasn't it. That's not it. That's not it. Darn it. I'm just going to do this. Hold on. I'll cut all this out of our resulting video. Why isn't, oh, so there should be, no wonder why it's not working. There's no keyboard shortcut, and no, there is. Command Control E. All right. Try it again. Command Control E. There it is. All right, so hopefully all my wanderings just now gave you time to think about this. So what do we think? Are we comfortable that with the translation, are we comfortable with what we've done? Some immoral acts are impeachable, but not all are impeachable.
Can you translate that as some immoral acts are impeachable, but not all immoral acts are impeachable?
Yep.
Okay.
And then let me just double check that right, M is immoral. Okay, that's what I did. All right, and then as I'd mentioned when we first started talking about the multiply quantified sentences and then drill down a bit on the word only as it applies in quantified sentences and the expression the only as it applies, right? That this sentence that I had found in an article is what set off that discussion, right? So here's one of the things that that I find helpful about doing this work. So when I'm reading a news article, and especially if it's an article that covers some topic I'm either interested in or that I have some fairly strong view about, right? I tend to, like everybody else, import my beliefs onto the article. Like, no, this person's wrong, and how can this be right? So I have kind of these ordinary. I say ordinary because I think they are just sort of ordinary knee-jerk reactions to things. And so if I focus instead on saying, okay, what is actually being said here? What's the claim that's being made? And how can I understand the structure of this claim? And then the way I'm thinking about it is, how can I understand what the relationships are said to be, right? The so-called sufficient and necessary conditions to be met such that this sentence comes out true, right? Then I'm focused on, or my disposition, if you will, maybe my posture changes to analytical mode. And that's much more useful to me overall, especially if, let's say, my knee-jerk response results in an erroneous belief about what's being said, right? So if I put myself in analytical mode, specifically, I'm focusing on, an analysis of the logical structure of the sentence, then I at least know that I can try to get something right. I'm after something that's not just a confirmation of whatever bias I might have. Okay, so here we have, right, the word that we were working on Tuesday, last Thursday, right? So any violation of the public trust is impeachable, but only crimes that are also violations of the public trust meet that standard. So now I'm going to start to do something like this. I'm going to say, okay, what animals do I have here? I can start either with quantifiers or breaking down the elements of the sentence in terms of the predicates, right? So we have violations of public trust, which I think we had said we're going to symbolize with V, and variable, in this case, variable X. And then we have impeachable things, which we said would be I, so X is things that are impeachable. And then let's see, C is, okay, so capital C. And then again, violations of public trust. And then meet that standard. What standard are we talking about? Impeachability, right? So impeachability is am I wrong about that? Yeah, impeachability. Sorry, I misread the sentence. Oops. Right, so I might start by laying things out this way. Another way that I might start, let's do this. Right, so I might say, okay, I've got my universal quantifier, and then I've got only crimes is also going to be universal, right? And then this only crimes, that means that crimes is going to be on the right side of the arrow, right? So does this make sense? That you want to start to break the sentence apart, okay? Now, once you've done that, Or maybe in lieu of doing that, you might say, I want to just start to translate the thing in the order that the elements appear. When I use my shortcut for the universal, I end up with a capital X, or maybe the font has changed, but I have to fix that up. Okay, so we've got the universal violations of public trust are impeachable, and another universal, I'm going to use the same variable because I can. And remember, crimes comes after the arrow. But we have another arrow, right? Only crimes that are also violations of the public trust meet what standard? That impeachability standard. So we've got another arrow here. Question for you. Are you comfortable with saying that we're talking about violations there? So if we want to use the language of inferential language, violations, so crimes, so impeachability, and we've got to figure out which of our arrows is the main connective of this sentence. Or are we talking about maybe a different connective altogether? So here's my question. Does the sentence more properly work this way? Right? So let's just hone in on this part of the sentence, right? So this is one separate, complete sentence. Grammatically, right, there's a comma, so we're going to add to the existing sentence that we translated. But this is the one that we're curious about, right? Only crimes that are also violations, right? So is it the case that the necessary condition for impeachability is both crimes that violate that, both things that are crimes and that as such violate the public standard? Is that what we're talking about? And so here's where we can enter into another level of discussion that's useful to us. Let's set aside what the right translation is. Let's think about what puzzling through the possibilities are tells us about what the implication is of this translation versus that translation, right? So this would be something, for example, that you would do. Obviously, we're talking about legal matters, but also moral matters. This is something you would do if you're thinking about policy, think about law. But it also it can also, with changes in the language, have us enter into other domains, like in the physical sciences, for example, or the social sciences, political science, for example. Okay, so what do we think about this? So if we read this animal, here's what we now have. For every x, If X is impeachable, then it must be both a violation of the public trust and a crime, or a crime and a violation of public trust. And then I'm going to copy paste and then ask ourselves and ask us to consider next what we're saying.
If you write it in that context, if impeachment is false, will violations and crimes still be true?
Deb, are you talking about if you, hold on just one sec, I should have done this earlier. Are you saying that if you deny the antecedent?
Correct. If it's false, isn't it the consequent always true?
No, so from the standpoint of, go back to your conditional elim, as well as your negation intro. The only way to, so nothing follows but from denying the antecedent. The consequent may be true, it may be false. We just don't know. That wouldn't be a valid inference.
Okay.
Am I answering your question?
Yeah, like if the antecedent is false, you can't draw any conclusion, is what you're saying, right?
Correct. Okay. If we go back to our truth functional system, or a system of truth functionality. Now, if we were to think just in terms of truth functionality, we can say that if over here, the two arrows can actually be translated as follows. Right? So a question that we have is, which of these captures what, this sentence says? Okay, so let's go ahead and, let me erase this stuff. Let's go ahead for the moment and set this aside. We will come back to it, sort of digest it a little bit. Here's another example that I wanted to get to, because one of the things that we've talked a little bit about is how to be sensitive to the ordinary English. So yes, we can always translate literally, where literally means we take an ordinary English word and we translate it using the relevant symbolic logic notation, right? So for example, here we'd have the following. And I'm just, for the sake of expediency, D is dogs, C is cats, dog, cat, animal, A is animal. So when we read the sentence back, we realize, wait a minute, when we say dogs and cats are animals, what we mean and what we understand implicitly is that we're talking about the things that are dogs, the things that are cats, and they're not the same thing. But here, the and, when it's translated using the conjunction operator, the caret in our version of the system, we end up with a sentence that reads as follows: for every x, if x is a dog and x is a cat, then x is an animal. And we say, wait a minute, that's not what we mean to say. We don't mean to say that a thing is a dog and a cat. So to be sensitive to the context, we use our disjunction. For every x, if x is a dog or a cat, then it's an animal. And if we want to be very explicit about exclusivity, we would say, but not both, right? We're talking about two sets of thing that can't be, there's no overlap between them. Okay, so just think about those things as you're moving along with working on translations. Okay, so let's come back to this guy. This color is kind of hard to read.
On the first sentence, I have a question.
Dereje, which one are we talking about? The one we were just working on, this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
We are talking about the main ingredient of that sentence, which is impeachable. That's the whole idea of the sentence, even though the rest of the sentence is just supporting different condition about that impeachment. Yeah.
Right. So I read this sentence as, I find the sentence confusing, right? So here's how I might try to help myself out of the confusion before I even translate it. So let's take the first one. Any violation of the public trust is impeachable. So
that's the goal. Like it's indicating that, like, about impeachment.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about impeachment. So if in this first sentence, right, I have violations of the public trust being impeachable, right? But then I'm going to go ahead and try to adjust this a little bit. But then we've got only crimes that are also violations of the public trust. Okay, so remember, whatever comes after only, immediately after only, goes in the consequent position. And I take the phrase are also to mean that we've got crimes and violations of public trust, right?
Yeah, but another possibility.
Well, but here's the curious thing. If impeachability on the first sentence, right, is on the right side of the arrow. But in the second sentence, if I understand things correctly, it's on the left side. So then I'm wondering, right, so now I've got here another circle. Here's the both crimes and violations of public trust. So then I think, we've got the violations being sufficient for impeachability, but impeachability is sufficient for, or another way to put it is, crimes and violations, which also occur here, is a necessary condition. So then I wonder, well, maybe we've got something like, here's a necessary condition, here's a sufficient condition, here's a sufficient condition, here's part of a necessary condition. Are we really talking about something like a two-way arrow, right? A joint necessary and sufficient condition, we know, for example, that if I just sort of pull this, or sorry, separate each side, right? This looks like a quasi joint necessary and sufficient condition. I say quasi because what's missing in this on the left side of this conjunction is the crimes, the category of crimes. Yeah. And so we know from chapter 7, right, that one way to talk about the joint necessary and sufficient condition, which we translate as a biconditional, is if and only if, right? So here we've got an if, and then here we've got an only if, although the part of this only if, right, is not included in the if in the first articulation. So then we're, one of the questions that I would have for the person who's holding this view is, okay, so, what am I missing here? Right? And it may be the case that, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've told you guys on multiple occasions, I tend to think very slowly, and I also need lots of time to digest on top of that, right? So when I'm working through stuff, I think slowly, and then I also need time to sort of sort it out. And so, it may be the case that there's something very obvious that I'm missing, obvious to some, but not to me. Right? But Dereji, I think that your thinking makes a lot of sense. Impeachability here is, certainly it's the topic of the article, and it's the topic of the sentence. And the questions are, what is it that we're saying when we talk about some action rising to the level of impeachability?
Yeah, it shows a lot of different possibilities that impeachable will happen, kind of thing.
Yeah, obviously not everybody agrees, right? So
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, so I thought that might be a fun, I hope, way to bring what we've been doing into sort of our daily lives and puzzle through some of it. I hope that if you were to go back to the, I guess it was a week ago today that we were initially talking about these animals, that if you go back into that discussion, you say, okay, yeah, I remember what we were talking about. This makes some sense. Okay, so